The night my mate betrayed me, the wolves began to sing. I did not know then that their voices were not mourning my death, but heralding my becoming. For 5 winters I had walked the frost-hardened paths of Thornhallow, my boots wearing grooves into the same earth my grandmother once tread. I was Ilara, daughter of no one the village cared to remember, granddaughter of Marin the healer, the woman they whispered about in firelit corners when they thought I could not hear. They called her touched. They called her wolf speaker. They called her necessary, which was the only reason they tolerated me at all. I rose before dawn each morning to gather the frost-kissed herbs that grew along the forest's edge, never venturing too deep, never crossing the ancient boundary stones that marked where the village's claim ended and the wild began. My grandmother had taught me the names of every root and leaf, every bark and blossom, and I carried her knowledge like a second heartbeat within my chest. Feverfew for the aching heads of elders, willow bark for the swollen joints of farmers, yarrow for the wounds of hunters who returned bloody from their expeditions into territories they should never have entered. I healed them all. I asked for nothing but enough to survive. And I loved Kaelin with the kind of devotion that only the young and foolish can muster, the kind that mistakes crumbs for feasts and silence for depth. He was the son of Elder Aldrich, the man who governed Thornhallow with a fist wrapped in velvet and a smile that never reached his eyes. Kaelin was not like his father, or so I believed. Where Aldrich saw the forest as a threat to be conquered, Kaelin spoke of balance. Where the other young men of the village sharpened their spears and boasted of wolf pelts, Kaelin walked with me along the river and asked me to name the winter birds that gathered in the bare branches of the willows. He touched my face with hands that had never drawn blood. He promised me a future in a voice soft as snowfall. 5 years. 5 winters of stolen moments and whispered oaths. 5 seasons of waiting for him to speak to his father, to claim me openly, to give me the life he swore was mine by right. I should have seen the truth sooner. I should have recognized the way his eyes slid away from mine when his father entered a room. I should have noticed how he never defended me when the village women clucked their tongues at my unmarried state, at my strange profession, at the rumors that clung to my family name like burrs to wool. But love is a peculiar blindness. It shows you only what you wish to see, and drapes shadows over everything else. The solstice came as it always did, with the first true deep freeze and the lighting of the great bonfire in the village square. It was the night when matches were blessed, when young couples stepped forward to have their unions witnessed by the elders and sanctified by the ancient words that bound our people to the land. I had braided my hair with the last of the dried lavender from my stores. I had worn my grandmother's pendant, the one she had pressed into my palm on her deathbed, the silver wolf charm that I kept hidden beneath my collar every other day of the year. Tonight, I thought, I would not need to hide it. Tonight, Kaelin would finally speak. The square was crowded with bodies, the air thick with wood smoke and the smell of mulled wine. Children darted between the legs of adults, their laughter high and bright against the darkness beyond the firelight. I searched for Kaelin among the faces, my heart a caged bird throwing itself against my ribs. And when I found him standing beside his father near the great fire, something in his expression made me hesitate. He looked at me the way one looks at a stranger. No, worse. He looked at me the way one looks at a threat. I told myself I was imagining things. I pressed through the crowd, smiling at the neighbors who stepped aside for me, the ones who just last week had come to my door begging for remedies and pressing coins into my palm with trembling, grateful fingers. Old Marta, whose cough I had soothed with honeyed thyme. Young Bren, whose infected wound I had cleaned and bound and saved from the rot that would have taken his arm. They had all come to me in their moments of need, and I had never turned a single one away. I reached the inner circle just as Elder Aldrich raised his hands for silence. The first couple stepped forward, then the second. I watched them speak their vows, watched the elders bind their wrists with braided cord, watched the firelight dance across faces bright with joy and hope. and the promise of tomorrow. And through it all, I kept my eyes on Kalen, waiting for him to turn, to extend his hand, to call me forward at last. When the ceremonies ended and the crowd began to shift toward the feast tables, I made my way to his side. My fingers brushed his sleeve. He flinched as if I had burned him. "Kalen," I said, and my voice came out smaller than I intended. "What is wrong?" He did not answer. He only looked at his father, and something passed between them, some silent agreement that I was not privy to, some verdict rendered in a courtroom I had never been allowed to enter. It was Elder Aldrich who spoke first. His voice carried across the square, loud enough for all to hear, and one by one, the villagers fell silent and turned to watch. "Ilara of the forest's edge," he said, and my name sounded like an accusation in his mouth. "You have lived among us for many years, trading in herbs and potions, walking paths that honest folk avoid. There are those who say you speak to the beasts of the wild. There are those who say you carry the same sickness that consumed your grandmother, that you are a vessel for spirits that do not belong in this world." I could not speak. My tongue had turned to stone in my mouth, and all around me, the faces that had smiled at me just moments ago were hardening into masks of suspicion and fear. Aldrich continued, his words falling like hammer blows. "My son has confessed that you have attempted to bewitch him, to bind him to you through unnatural means. He has asked for the village's protection, and as his father and as your elder, I have no choice but to grant it." The world tilted. I turned to Kalen, searching his face for some sign that this was a mistake, a misunderstanding, a terrible joke that would end with his laughter and his arms around me. But there was nothing in his eyes, nothing at all. He had emptied himself of me completely. "Is this true?" I whispered, and I hated how my voice broke on the words. "Kalen, tell them the truth. Tell them what we are to each other." He straightened his shoulders. He lifted his chin, and in a voice as cold and distant as the winter stars, he said the words that shattered everything I had built my life upon. "I have no bond with this woman," he said. "I have never promised her anything. She has pursued me against my wishes, and I fear what she might do if she is allowed to remain among us." Liar. The word tore from my throat before I could stop it. "You held me in your arms not 3 nights past. You told me you loved me. You swore we would be together," the crowd murmured. I saw pity in some faces, disgust in others, and in far too many. A gleam of vindication, as if they had always known I was something to be feared and were relieved to finally have permission to say so. Elder Aldrich raised his hand again. "Enough," he said. "The evidence is clear. This woman is not fit to live among decent people. She will leave Thornhallow before dawn, and if she is seen within our borders again, she will be treated as any other threat to our safety." My legs gave out. I sank to my knees in the frozen mud, the cold seeping through my skirts and into my bones. But I could not feel it. I could not feel anything except the vast, howling emptiness where my heart had been. The crowd parted around me like water around a stone. One by one, they turned away, returning to their wine and their laughter and their blessed, ordinary lives. Even old Marta would not meet my eyes. Even young Bren, whose arm I had saved, ducked his head and hurried past as if I were a stranger, as if I were nothing. Only one person paused, a man I barely knew, one of the younger farmers who lived on the village's southern edge. His name was Tomlin, I thought, or something like it. He crouched beside me, his voice low and urgent. "There is a path behind the mill," he said. "It leads north, into the mountains. If you go now, before the hunters wake, you might have a chance." I looked up at him, this stranger who risked his standing to show me kindness, and I saw something in his face that I could not name. Guilt, perhaps, or grief, or simply the recognition of one outcast for another. "Why?" I asked. "Why would you help me?" He hesitated. Then he said, My mother was a healer too. They drove her out when I was a boy. I never saw her again. He pressed something into my hand, a small leather pouch that clinked with the sound of coins. "Go," he said. "Do not look back." I did not thank him. There were no words adequate to the moment. I simply rose, my grandmother's pendant burning against my chest like a brand, and I walked out of the only home I had ever known. The forest swallowed me before I reached the tree line. I do not remember much of those first hours. I walked because stopping meant dying, and despite everything, some stubborn flame within me refused to be extinguished. The snow began to fall before midnight, thick and silent, erasing my tracks as quickly as I made them. I stumbled over roots and stones, my thin shoes soaking through, my cloak heavy with ice. The cold was a living thing, a predator that stalked me through the darkness, waiting for the moment when my strength would finally fail. I thought of my grandmother. I thought of the stories she used to tell me when I was small, curled beside her fire while winter raged outside. She spoke of the white wolves who guarded the deep forest, ancient creatures bound to the land by a pact older than memory. She spoke of the women who had served as bridges between the human world and the wild, who carried the old songs in their blood and the forest's voice in their hearts. She told me that I was one of them, that the gift would wake in me when the time was right, and I had smiled and nodded and believed it was only a tale. Now, lost in the frozen dark with no path and no hope, I wondered if she had been trying to prepare me for this all along. The wolves found me just before dawn. I had collapsed at the base of a great pine, its branches heavy with snow, its trunk wide enough to offer some small shelter from the wind. My body had stopped shivering, which some distant part of my mind recognized as a very bad sign. I could no longer feel my hands or my feet. My thoughts had grown slow and strange, drifting like leaves on a frozen stream. I heard them before I saw them, the soft crunch of paws on snow, the whisper of breath in the darkness. I opened my eyes, and they were there, emerging from the forest like ghosts made flesh. There were 3 of them, 2 smaller wolves, their coats the color of fresh cream, their eyes like molten amber in the pre-dawn gray, and behind them, larger than any wolf I had ever seen, a creature out of legend, his fur white as the snow he walked upon, his shoulders scarred with the marks of countless battles, his gaze holding an intelligence that was not quite animal. The Alpha, the white king of the northern forest, the beast that hunters whispered about in fearful tones, the one they said could not be killed by any mortal weapon. He walked toward me, his great paws silent on the frozen ground, and I knew I should have been afraid. I should have screamed, or prayed, or at least closed my eyes against the death that was surely coming. But I was too tired for fear. I was too empty for anything except a strange, distant curiosity about what would happen next. The Alpha stopped an arm's length away. He lowered his massive head until his eyes were level with mine, and I felt his breath on my face, warm and alive in a world that had become nothing but cold. We looked at each other for a long moment, the woman and the wolf, the exile and the king. And then, impossibly, he spoke. Not with words as humans use them, but with something deeper, something that bypassed my ears entirely and settled directly into the center of my mind. "You carry the old blood," he said. "You are the one we have been waiting for." I wanted to answer. I wanted to ask what he meant, what he wanted, what possible use a dying woman could be to a creature like him. But my strength had finally failed me. The darkness rose up like a wave, and the last thing I saw before it claimed me was the smaller wolf, the female, pressing her warm body against my side as if she could hold me in the world by sheer force of will. When I woke, I was no longer in the snow. I was lying on a bed of soft furs in a cave I did not recognize, firelight dancing on walls covered in strange markings, symbols that seemed to shift and pulse with a life of their own. The female wolf was curled at my feet, her amber eyes watching me with an expression that was almost tender. And standing at the cave's entrance, silhouetted against a sky just beginning to lighten with dawn, was the white alpha. He turned when he sensed I was awake. In the growing light, I could see his scars more clearly, the old wounds that mapped his body like a history written in flesh. He was beautiful in the way that mountains are beautiful, in the way that storms are beautiful, with a terrible, ancient majesty that made me feel very small and very mortal. "Welcome to the heart of the forest, Guardian," he said. "Your old life is over. Your true life begins today." I sat up slowly, my body aching but surprisingly whole. The cold had not claimed me after all. Someone, something, had saved me from the death I had been walking toward. "I do not understand," I said, and my voice was rough from disuse, from cold, from the screaming I had done in my dreams. "I am no one. I am nothing." The village cast me out because they believed I was cursed. The alpha moved closer, his great form casting shadows on the cave wall. "You are Marin's heir," he said, "the last of the guardian line. The forest has called you home at last." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice held something that might have been sorrow. "We have waited a long time for you, child. We had almost given up hope." The pendant at my throat grew warm, and I pressed my hand against it instinctively. My grandmother's pendant. The silver wolf. "She knew," I whispered. "She knew this would happen. She knew what you could become," the alpha said. "Whether you accept it or not is your choice. But the forest is dying, Guardian. The balance has been broken for too long. Without a bridge between our world and yours, there will be nothing left to save." I thought of Thornhallow. I thought of Kalen's empty eyes and his father's poisonous words. I thought of all the years I had spent trying to belong, trying to earn a place among people who had never truly wanted me. And I thought of my grandmother's voice, soft and sure in my memory, telling me stories of wolves and women and the ancient pact that bound them together. The female wolf rose and padded toward me. She pressed her muzzle against my hand, and I felt something flow between us, a warmth that was not physical, a recognition that went deeper than words. "I am Senna," she said, her voice gentle in my mind. "I will teach you. I will guide you. You are not alone anymore, sister. You never have to be alone again." Tears spilled down my cheeks, and I did not try to stop them. For the first time since the solstice night, I let myself feel the full weight of everything I had lost. My home, my love, my illusions about who I was and what my life was meant to be. But beneath the grief, something else was stirring, something fierce and bright and hungry. The village had cast me out. They had called me cursed. They had taken everything I had and thrown me to the winter to die. They did not know what they had unleashed. Outside the cave, the sun was rising over the mountains, painting the snow in shades of gold and rose. The white alpha watched me with those ancient, knowing eyes, waiting for my answer, waiting to see what I would choose. I looked at the cave walls, at the symbols that pulsed with hidden power. I looked at Senna, at her amber eyes full of patience and hope. I looked at my grandmother's pendant, resting against my heart like a promise. And I made my choice. "Teach me," I said. "Show me who I am supposed to be." The alpha dipped his head in acknowledgement. "Then rest now, Guardian," he said. "Tomorrow, your training begins. Tomorrow, you take the first step toward becoming the woman your grandmother always knew you could be." He turned and padded out of the cave, disappearing into the dawn light. Senna curled up beside me again, her warmth a comfort against the lingering chill in my bones. I lay back on the furs and stared at the firelight flickering on the ceiling. My old life was over. The woman I had been, the healer who had loved a coward and begged for scraps of belonging, she had died in the snow last night. Whoever I was becoming, she would not make the same mistakes. As sleep began to claim me again, I heard the wolves singing in the distance, their voices rising in a chorus that echoed through the mountains like a hymn. And this time, I understood. They were not mourning. They were welcoming me home. The first thing I learned as a guardian was how to be still. It sounds simple, perhaps even foolish, but Senna insisted upon it with a patience that bordered on stubbornness. She would lead me out of the cave at dawn, when the world was hushed and silver with frost, and she would sit beside me in the snow while the sun climbed slowly over the eastern peaks. "Do not think," she would say, her voice a warm current in my mind. "Do not plan, do not remember. Simply be here, in this moment, and let the forest speak." I was terrible at it. My mind was a wild thing, untrained and undisciplined, forever circling back to the wounds that had driven me here. I would close my eyes and see Kaylin's face, empty of love, empty of everything we had shared. I would hear Elder Aldrich's voice condemning me before the village, and feel again the cold shock of realization as the people I had healed turned their backs and walked away. The memories were thorns embedded in my flesh, and every time I tried to be still, they twisted deeper. Senna never grew frustrated with me. She simply waited, her amber eyes soft with understanding, until I exhausted myself with grief and anger, and finally found a moment of quiet beneath the storm. "That is the beginning," she said, when I opened my eyes after what felt like hours and found the sun already high in the sky. "That small silence you found just now. That is the door. In time, you will learn to hold it open." I did not believe her, but I returned to the same spot the next morning, and the morning after that, and slowly, so slowly I almost did not notice it happening, the door began to widen. The White Alpha, whose name I learned was Varric, watched my progress from a distance. He was not unkind, but there was a gravity to him that made casual conversation impossible. When he spoke, it was with the weight of centuries behind his words, and I found myself listening even when I did not fully understand. On my third day in the cave, he came to me as I sat by the fire, studying the strange markings on the walls. They shifted in the flickering light, forming patterns that almost resolved into meaning before slipping away again. "Your grandmother carved those," Varric said, settling his great form beside me. His fur was warm against my arm, and I resisted the urge to bury my fingers in it like a child seeking comfort. "She spent many winters in this cave, learning what you are now learning. The symbols are a record of her journey. When you are ready, you will be able to read them." I traced one of the marks with my fingertip, a spiral that seemed to pulse faintly at my touch. "She never told me," I said. "She spoke of the wolves, of the old pact, but she never said she had lived among you. She never said she was a guardian." Varric was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "Marin made a choice. When she was young, she accepted the calling and served the forest well. But she fell in love with a man from the village, your grandfather, and she chose to return to the human world. She hoped to bridge both lives, to serve both masters. For a time, she succeeded." "What happened?" I asked, though some part of me already knew the answer. "The village discovered her gifts," Varric said. "They did not burn her, as they might have in older times, but they made her life a misery. They called her witch. They blamed her for every illness, every failed crop, every misfortune that befell them. Your grandfather died trying to defend her, and after that, she retreated to the forest's edge and kept her head down. She healed them when they came to her, because that was her nature, but she never again tried to teach them the truth of what she was. And me," I said. "She never taught me either." "She was afraid," Varric said. "She saw how the village treated her, and she feared they would treat you the same way if they knew. She hoped that by keeping you ignorant, she could protect you." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was heavy with old sorrow. "She was wrong. The blood will out, as they say. You cannot hide from what you are, child. You can only choose how to carry it. I thought of all the years I had spent trying to be ordinary, trying to fit into a village that had never truly wanted me. Trying to love a man who had seen me only as a curiosity, a novelty, a secret to be enjoyed in darkness and denied in the light. "I am done hiding," I said, and I meant it with every fiber of my being. I am done pretending to be less than I am. Varric dipped his head, and I could have sworn I saw approval in his ancient eyes. "Good," he said. "Then we will begin your true training tomorrow." True training, I soon discovered, was nothing like the gentle stillness exercises Senna had been guiding me through. It was brutal, exhausting, and frequently terrifying. Varric led me deep into the forest, to places where the snow was unmarked by any human foot, where the trees grew so thick that the sky was only a distant memory glimpsed through gaps in the canopy. He showed me the sacred groves where the old spirits dwelt, beings of bark and shadow who watched us pass with eyes like pools of midnight. He took me to the frozen waterfall where the river's voice still sang beneath the ice, a song of patience and endurance and the certainty of spring's return. He made me climb the ridge above the cave, where the wind cut like knives and the view stretched all the way to the distant smudge of Thornhallow on the horizon. "Look," he said, as I stood shivering in the bitter cold, my lungs burning with the thin mountain air. "Look at what you are sworn to protect." I looked. I saw the endless white of the winter forest, the dark line of the river winding through the valley, the faint columns of smoke rising from the village that had cast me out. From this height, Thornhallow looked small and fragile, a handful of houses huddled together against the vast indifference of the wild. I thought I would feel anger. I thought I would feel vindication, some dark pleasure at seeing my enemies reduced to specks in the distance. But what I felt instead was something much more complicated. I felt pity. I felt sorrow. I felt the weight of responsibility settling onto my shoulders like a mantle I had not asked for but could not refuse. "They fear what they do not understand," Varric said, reading my thoughts as easily as I might read the tracks of a rabbit in the snow. "They strike at what they fear. It is the way of humans. And it has been so since the first of your kind walked these forests. The guardians exist to protect the balance, child. Not just the forest from the village, but the village from itself. I do not want to protect them," I said, and my voice was small and tired. "They hurt me. They threw me away like I was nothing." Varric turned his great head to look at me, and in his eyes I saw a wisdom that spanned generations, a patience that had outlasted empires. "What you want and what you are called to do are not always the same thing," he said. "A guardian does not serve out of love for those she protects. She serves because it is right, because the balance must be maintained, because if it is not, everything falls." He paused, letting the wind howl around us, letting the cold seep into my bones until I was shaking with it. "But I will not lie to you," he continued. "There is satisfaction in strength. There is power in becoming what they feared you might be. Not because you will use that power against them, but because you will know in your deepest heart that you could. And you will choose mercy instead. That is the true test of a guardian. Not whether she can destroy, but whether she can restrain herself when destruction would be so easy." I stood on that ridge for a long time after he left me, watching the smoke rise from Thornhallow, feeling the cold work its way through my body until I was no longer sure where I ended, and the winter began. And slowly, like the first green shoots pushing through the snow at winter's end, I began to understand. The days blurred together after that. Senna taught me to read the forest's moods, to sense the shift in the air before a storm, to hear the whisper of prey moving through the underbrush. She showed me how to communicate with the other wolves, how to send my thoughts out like ripples on still water and receive their answers in return. It was strange and wonderful and sometimes overwhelming, like learning to breathe underwater after a lifetime of only knowing air. My body changed. The soft edges that village life had given me hardened into something leaner and stronger. I could run for hours without tiring. I could climb trees that would have defeated me before. I could sit in meditation for an entire day, my mind clear and still, the forest's heartbeat thrumming through me like a second pulse. But the most profound changes were the ones no one could see. My grandmother's pendant began to glow. It started slowly, a faint warmth against my skin when I was deep in meditation, or particularly attuned to the forest's rhythms. But as the weeks passed, the glow grew stronger, brighter, until the silver wolf charm shone with a light that seemed to come from within, a pale luminescence that pulsed in time with my heartbeat. "It is waking," Senna said, when I showed her. "Your grandmother's power passed into the pendant when she died. It has been waiting for you to be ready to receive it." I held the pendant in my palm, watching the light dance across its surface. It felt alive, somehow, warm and trembling with potential. "What do I do with it?" I asked. Senna's amber eyes were soft with something that might have been pride. "When the time comes, you will know," she said. "The pendant is a key, Alara. It opens the door to the deepest part of your gift. But you must be strong enough to walk through that door, or the power will consume you." I thought of my grandmother, the woman who had raised me, who had told me stories and taught me the names of herbs, and loved me with a ferocity that I had not fully appreciated until she was gone. I thought of all the secrets she had kept, all the truth she had hidden to protect me. "I will be strong enough," I said, "for her, for all of us." Senna pressed her muzzle against my cheek. "I know you will," she said. "I have always known. It was Varric who first told me about the sickness. He came to me one evening as I sat watching the sunset from the cave's entrance, the sky painted in shades of crimson and gold that seemed too beautiful to be real. There was something different in his bearing, a tension in his shoulders that I had not seen before. "The village is suffering," he said, settling beside me. "A plague has taken root among them. It started 3 days ago with the children." My heart clenched. Children. I thought of the little ones who had run through the solstice celebration, their laughter bright against the winter darkness. I thought of the babies I had helped deliver, the fevers I had broken, the small bodies I had nursed back from the brink. "What kind of plague?" I asked, and my voice came out steadier than I felt. Varric shook his head. "I do not know. My wolves have watched from the forest's edge, but they cannot enter the village to learn more. What they have seen is troubling. The sick ones are taken by fever first, then by visions. They speak of things that are not there. They cry out to people who are not present. And then, one by one, they fall silent." I stood abruptly, my hands clenched at my sides. "I have to go to them," I said. "I am a healer. I can help." Varric's eyes met mine, and in them I saw a question. "They cast you out," he said. "They called you witch and drove you into the winter to die. Why would you risk yourself for them now?" It was a fair question. A week ago, I might not have had an answer. But standing there in the fading light, with my grandmother's pendant warm against my chest and the forest's voice humming in my blood, I found that I did. "Because I am not who I was," I said. "Because they are sick and frightened and alone, and I have the power to help them. Because that is what a guardian does." I paused, tasting the words, finding them true. And because my grandmother would never forgive me if I let children die when I could have saved them. Varric was silent for a long moment. Then slowly, he dipped his head. "You have grown, child," he said. "More than I expected. More than I hoped." He rose to his feet, his great form silhouetted against the dying light. "But you cannot go alone. The village will not welcome you. And there are those who would use your return as an excuse to finish what they started. I will send Senna with you. She will keep you safe." I nodded, my mind already racing through the herbs I would need, the remedies I would have to prepare, the plan I would have to form. "When do we leave?" I asked. "Tomorrow," Varric said. "At first light. Rest tonight. You will need your strength." He turned to go, but I called after him. "Varric, what if they do not let me help them? What if they turn me away again? The white alpha paused at the cave's entrance, his scarred face unreadable in the shadows. Then you will have done what you could, he said. The choice of whether to accept your help is theirs, but the choice of whether to offer it is yours. He disappeared into the darkness, and I was alone with the last embers of the sunset and the weight of the decision I had made. I did not sleep that night. I sat by the fire, preparing bundles of dried herbs and trying not to think about what I might find when I reached Thornhallow. I thought instead of my grandmother, of the way she had moved through the world with such quiet certainty, healing those who came to her without judgment or hesitation. She had served a village that despised her, and she had done it with grace. I could do no less. Senna found me just before dawn, already pacing at the cave's entrance, my pack slung over my shoulder and my grandmother's pendant tucked securely beneath my collar. She looked at me with those amber eyes that saw so much more than any human gaze, and I felt her approval wash over me like warm water. "You are ready," she said. "Not a question." "I am terrified," I admitted, "but I am going anyway." Senna's tongue lolled in what I had come to recognize as a wolf smile. "That is what courage is," she said, "being afraid and going anyway." We left as the first light was breaking over the mountains, painting the snow in shades of rose and gold. The forest was quiet around us, the hush that comes after a long night of cold, when every living thing is waiting for the sun's warmth to release them. I moved differently now than I had on that desperate flight weeks ago. I was stronger, surer, my feet finding the safe paths without conscious thought. The forest spoke to me as I walked, its voice a constant murmur at the edge of my awareness, guiding me around hidden dangers and leading me toward my destination. It took us most of the day to reach the forest's edge. The sun was beginning to set again when we finally crested the last rise and looked down at Thornhallow spread out below us in the valley. Even from this distance, I could see that something was wrong. The village was too quiet. No smoke rose from half the chimneys. No children played in the streets. The doors were closed, the windows shuttered, and over everything hung a pall of silence that felt like held breath. "It is worse than I feared," Senna said, her voice grim. "The sickness has spread quickly." I started down the slope, my heart pounding, and that was when I saw them. 3 figures emerging from the tree line to my left. Men, wrapped in furs, their faces hard with fear and hatred. One of them carried a bow, an arrow already nocked and pointed directly at my heart. And at their head, his expression twisted with something that might have been guilt or triumph, or some terrible combination of both, stood Caelan, the son of Elder Aldrich, the man who had sworn he loved me, the man whose lies had driven me into the winter to die. "Witch," he called out, his voice ringing across the frozen hillside. "I knew you would come back. I knew you could not resist." The archers drew their bows. The hunters flanked out, cutting off my escape. And somewhere behind me, I heard Senna's growl rumbling like thunder in the gathering dark. I stood my ground and waited for what would come next. The arrow never flew. I do not know what stayed the hunter's hand. Perhaps it was the way I stood there, unmoving, unafraid, so different from the broken woman who had stumbled out of the village weeks before. Perhaps it was the low, rumbling growl that rose from Senna's throat, a sound that promised violence if violence was offered. Or perhaps it was something else entirely, some flicker of conscience in a man who had once called himself my beloved. Caelan's hand went up, a sharp gesture that halted his companions. His eyes never left mine, and in them I saw a storm of emotions he was struggling to contain. Fear, yes. Anger, certainly. But beneath those, something that looked almost like shame. "You should not have come back," he said. His voice was rough, as if he had not slept in days, as if something was eating at him from the inside out. "My father gave the order. Any who see you are to bring you before the council for judgment." "I am not here for you," I said. and I was surprised by how steady my voice sounded, how calm. I am here because your village is dying. I am here because children are sick, and there is no one else who can help them. The hunter with the bow, a thick-necked man I recognized as one of Elder Aldrich's most loyal followers, spat into the snow. "Help them," he snarled. "You are the one who cursed them, witch. Everyone knows it. The sickness started the day after you fled. It is your vengeance upon us." I could have laughed at the absurdity of it, but there was nothing funny about the hatred in his eyes, the genuine belief that I was capable of such cruelty. Instead, I held his gaze until he looked away, uncomfortable in a way he could not name. "If I had wanted vengeance," I said quietly, "I would have let you all die without lifting a finger. I would have watched from the mountains as your village emptied and your children were buried in frozen ground. But that is not who I am. That has never been who I am." Senna pressed against my leg, her warmth a comfort in the cold. I felt her readiness, her willingness to fight if fighting became necessary. But I also felt her trust in me, her belief that I could find another way. "Let me pass," I said. "Let me help the sick. When they are healed, I will leave and you will never see me again. I want nothing from you except the chance to do what I was born to do." Kalen's jaw tightened. He looked at his companions, at the arrows still pointed at my heart, at the wolf standing sentinel beside me. I could see the calculation in his face, the weighing of risks and rewards that his father had taught him so well. And then, slowly, he stepped aside. "One night," he said. "You have one night. If the sick are not better by dawn, I will drag you before my father myself." The other hunters protested, their voices rising in angry objection, but Kalen silenced them with a look. I did not understand what had changed in him, what had made him grant me even this small mercy. But I did not have time to wonder. Every moment I spent arguing was a moment someone might be slipping beyond my reach. I walked past him without another word, Senna ghosting at my side, and I did not look back. Thornhallow was a ghost of the village I remembered. The streets were empty, the market square silent, the doors marked with bundles of dried rowan berries that the villagers believed would ward off evil spirits. I saw faces peering at me through shuttered windows, pale and frightened, and I heard the whispers that followed me like shadows. The witch. The witch has returned. She has come to finish what she started. I ignored them. I had come to save them, not to answer their accusations. It was Tomlin who found me first, the young farmer who had helped me escape on that terrible night, who had pressed coins into my hand and shown me the path to the mountains. He emerged from a doorway as I passed, his face haggard with exhaustion and grief. "You came," he said, and there was wonder in his voice, as if he had hoped for it but never truly believed it would happen. I heard the rumors. I thought they were just stories. I stopped, looking at him more closely. He had aged years in the weeks since I had last seen him. There were shadows under his eyes and a tremor in his hands that spoke of too many sleepless nights. "How bad is it?" I asked. He shook his head, his eyes bright with unshed tears. 17 sick, he said. 4 dead already. His voice broke. "My sister is among them. She fell ill 3 days ago. The fever will not break. Take me to her," I said. "Take me to all of them." Tomlin led me through the silent streets to a large building near the center of the village, the gathering hall that was normally used for celebrations and councils. It had been converted into a makeshift infirmary, and the smell hit me before we even reached the door. Sickness and fear and the sharp, sour scent of bodies pushed beyond their limits. I hesitated at the threshold. Senna could not follow me inside without causing panic, and I was reluctant to leave her. "Go," she said, her voice a warm presence in my mind. "I will wait. I will watch. If you need me, I will come." I nodded and stepped through the door. The scene inside was worse than I had imagined. Makeshift beds lined the walls, each one occupied by a figure twisted with fever. The sounds of suffering filled the air, moans and whimpers, and the ragged gasps of those struggling to breathe. A handful of women moved between the beds, their faces gray with exhaustion, doing what little they could with damp cloths and prayers. No one noticed me at first. They were too consumed by their work, too focused on the desperate task of keeping their loved ones alive for one more hour, one more minute, one more breath. It was old Marta who saw me first. She looked up from the child she was tending, a girl of perhaps 7 years with sweat-matted hair and lips blue with fever, and her eyes went wide with shock. "The witch," she breathed. And then, louder, "The witch is here." The room erupted. Women screamed. Someone threw a clay pot at my head, which I ducked. Hands reached for me, some trying to push me back toward the door, others raised as if to strike. I stood my ground. "I am not here to hurt anyone," I said, my voice cutting through the chaos with an authority I had not known I possessed. "I am here to heal. Look at your children. Look at your families. You have tried everything else. You have prayed and wept and watched them slip away, and nothing has worked." The room fell silent. Every eye was on me, hostile and frightened and desperate. "I am the only chance you have," I said. "Let me help, or send me away and bury your dead. The choice is yours." For a long, terrible moment, no one moved. I could see the struggle in their faces, the war between fear and hope, between the lies they had been told and the truth that lay dying in front of them. It was Marta who moved first. Old Marta, who had come to my door so many times for remedies, who had pressed coins into my hand with grateful tears, who had looked away when I knelt in the mud on the night of my exile. She stepped back from the child's bed and gestured for me to approach. "Save her," she said, and her voice was thick with shame. "Save my granddaughter. I do not care what you are. Just save her." I moved to the bedside and looked down at the girl. Her skin was pale as milk, her breathing shallow and labored, her eyes moving rapidly beneath closed lids as if she was trapped in some terrible dream. I laid my hand on her forehead and felt the fever burning beneath her skin, a fire that was consuming her from within. And beneath the fever, something else, something dark and wrong, a shadow that clung to her spirit like frost to a window pane. This was no ordinary sickness. This was something deeper, something that had roots in a place my herbs alone could not reach. I closed my eyes and reached for the stillness Senna had taught me. I let the world fall away, the whispers and the fear and the weight of expectation, until there was nothing left but the darkness behind my eyes and the steady rhythm of my own heartbeat. And then I went deeper. It was like stepping through a door into another room, a room that existed alongside the one I could see but was hidden from ordinary perception. The gathering hall was still there, but now I could see the threads that connected everything, the web of life and energy that bound every living thing together. The sick ones burned like candles guttering in a wind, their flames flickering, threatening to go out. And I could see the shadow. It moved between them, feeding on them, a darkness that had no form but only hunger. It was old, whatever it was, old and patient and utterly without mercy. It had found its way into the village somehow, had taken root in the vulnerable and the young, and it was growing stronger with every life it consumed. I did not know how to fight it. I did not know if it could be fought at all. But I knew I had to try. I reached for my grandmother's pendant, the silver wolf that pulsed with warmth against my skin. I thought of Varek's words about the power it contained, about the door it could open if I was strong enough to walk through. I was not ready. I knew I was not ready, but the child in front of me was dying, and there was no more time. I grasped the pendant and let the power flow. It was like being struck by lightning and drowned in warm honey at the same time. Energy surged through me, ancient and vast, the accumulated wisdom and strength of every guardian who had come before. I felt my grandmother's presence, Not as a ghost, but as a memory woven into the light, guiding my hands and steadying my heart. "I am here," she seemed to say. "I have always been here. Now show them what we can do." I reached out with the light and wrapped it around the shadow, and I pulled. The shadow fought. It screamed without sound, a vibration of pure malevolence that shook me to my bones. It clawed at the child's spirit, desperate to hold on, to finish what it had started. But I was stronger. The pendant was stronger. The legacy of every guardian who had ever stood against the darkness was stronger. I tore the shadow free. It came loose with a wrenching sensation, like pulling a deeply rooted weed from frozen ground. For a moment it hung in the air before me, a writhing mass of hatred and hunger, and I saw something that might have been eyes, something that might have been a face twisted in fury. Then the light consumed it, and it was gone. I opened my eyes. I was on my knees beside the child's bed, my hands trembling, my body drained of every ounce of strength. The pendant was dark against my chest. Its warmth faded to a faint echo of what it had been. But the child was breathing. Her color was returning, the blue fading from her lips, the fever sweat cooling on her brow. Even as I watched, her eyes fluttered open, and she looked up at me with the confused, wondering gaze of someone waking from a terrible dream. The room was utterly silent. Every person in the gathering hall was staring at me, their expressions a mixture of awe and terror, and something that might have been the first fragile stirrings of hope. "How?" Marta whispered. "How did you do that?" I did not have the strength to answer. I could only gesture weakly toward the next bed, toward the next patient, toward the work that still needed to be done. "Help me," I said. "Please. There are still so many." They hesitated. I could see the fear still lurking in their eyes, the suspicion that had been planted so deeply by Elder Aldrich and his son. But I could also see it warring with something else, something stronger. Gratitude. Shame. The dawning realization that everything they had believed about me might have been a lie. It was Tomlin who moved first. He knelt beside me, his hands steady, his face set with determination. "Tell me what to do," he said. "I will help." And slowly, one by one, the others joined him. We worked through the night. I could not use the pendant's power again. Not so soon. Not when it had drained so much from me. But I still had my herbs, my knowledge, the healing skills my grandmother had taught me through years of patient instruction. I showed the villagers how to prepare the remedies, which leaves to crush and which roots to boil, how to cool a fever and ease a tortured breath. And as I worked, I began to understand the shadow. It was not a curse. It was not a monster in the way the old stories told of monsters. It was something older and sadder, a spirit of the deep forest that had lost its way. In the old days, my grandmother would have guided it back to where it belonged, would have soothed its confusion and sent it home. But she had died, and there had been no one to take her place, and the spirit had wandered until it found the village and began to feed. It had not meant to kill. It had only been hungry, lost, desperate for something it could not name. I thought of Kalen, of his fear and his weakness, of the way he had thrown me away to protect himself. I thought of Elder Aldrich, who saw threats everywhere and met them all with cruelty. I thought of the village that had cast me out and then suffered for it, not because I had cursed them, but because they had driven away the one person who could have protected them. Fear makes monsters of us all. My grandmother had once said, "Remember that, child. When you see cruelty, look for the fear beneath it. That is where the healing truly begins." Dawn came slowly, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold that I was too exhausted to appreciate. But with the light came something I had not dared to hope for. The sick were recovering. Not all of them, not completely. But the fever had broken in bed after bed, and the terrible dreams had faded, and the children were waking with clear eyes and wondering voices asking for water, for food, for their mothers. Tomlin found me slumped against the wall near the door, too tired to stand, too stubborn to leave. His sister was one of the recovered, and there were tears on his face when he crouched beside me. "You saved them," he said. "After everything they did to you, you saved them." I tried to smile, but my face was too heavy. "It is not about what they did," I said. "It is about what I am, what I was always supposed to be." He looked at me with something new in his eyes, something that went beyond gratitude, beyond even admiration. I was too tired to examine it, to wonder what it meant. I only knew that it felt warm, like sunlight after a long winter. "What happens now?" he asked. Before I could answer, the door burst open, and Kalen stood in the entrance, his face white with fury. "Time is up," he said. "The night is over. My father is waiting." Behind him, I could see the gray light of dawn and the shapes of armed men gathered in the street. And beyond them, at the edge of my awareness, I felt Senna's presence, tense and ready. The healing was not finished. The gratitude of the villagers meant nothing if Elder Aldrich still saw me as a threat. I pushed myself to my feet, my legs trembling beneath me, and I walked toward the man who had destroyed my life. "Then let us go," I said. "Let us see what your father has to say." Kalen's eyes flickered with something I could not read. Surprise, perhaps, that I was not begging, not running, not showing any of the fear he had expected. I walked past him into the cold morning air, and I did not let him see how much the walking cost me. The council was waiting. The council hall smelled of old wood and older fears. I had been inside this building only twice before in my life, once as a child, clutching my grandmother's hand while she pleaded for the right to continue her work as a healer. Once as a young woman, standing silent in the shadows while Elder Aldrich pronounced judgment on a farmer accused of stealing grain. Both times I had felt the weight of the room pressing down on me, the heavy beams and the flickering torchlight and the circle of stern-faced elders who held the power of life and death over everyone in Thornhallow. Now I walked into that same room, with my head held high and my grandmother's pendant warm against my chest, and I felt something I had never expected to feel in this place. I felt like I belonged. Elder Aldrich sat at the head of the long table, his silver hair gleaming in the torchlight, his face a mask of controlled fury. The other elders flanked him, 5 men and 2 women whose names I knew, but whose faces had blurred together in my memory over the years. They were followers, all of them. People who had learned long ago that disagreeing with Aldrich was a dangerous game. Kalen took his place at his father's right hand, and I watched the way he avoided my eyes, the way his jaw tightened whenever he accidentally caught my gaze. He looked like a man being slowly eaten alive by something he could not name. Good, I thought, and I was surprised by the coldness of it. Let him feel what I felt. Let him understand. The doors closed behind me, and I was alone in the center of the room, surrounded by enemies. Senna was outside, I knew, waiting with the patience that only wolves possess. She had promised to come if I called. I hoped I would not have to. "Ilara of the forest's edge," Aldrich began, and his voice filled the room like smoke. "You were banished from this village on the night of the winter solstice. You were told that returning would be treated as a crime against the community, and yet here you stand." I said nothing. I had learned, in my weeks among the wolves, that silence could be a weapon. Let him talk. Let him condemn himself with his own words. "You were seen entering the village yesterday evening in the company of a wolf," Aldrich continued. "A creature of the wild, a beast that has no place among civilized people." "That beast," I said quietly, "has more honor than half the men in this room." A murmur ran through the elders. Aldrich's eyes narrowed. "You dare to speak to this council with such disrespect?" he said. "You, who were cast out as a witch and a corrupter of innocent men?" I stepped forward, and I watched several of the elders flinch. "Was I a witch, Elder Aldrich?" I asked. Or was I simply inconvenient? Was I a corrupter? Or was your son too cowardly to admit that he had made promises he never intended to keep? Kaelin made a small sound, something between a gasp and a groan. I did not look at him. I kept my eyes on his father, on the man who had orchestrated my destruction, and I let him see that I was no longer afraid. The people of this village were dying, I said. I came back to save them. I spent the night in your gathering hall, healing the sick, driving out the fever that was consuming your children. Ask anyone who was there. Ask Marta, whose granddaughter was hours from death before I pulled her back. Ask Tomlin, whose sister breathes this morning because of my herbs and my hands. I paused, letting the words settle. I am not your enemy, Elder. I never was. But you were so determined to see a threat that you created one. Aldrich's face had gone pale, then red, then pale again. He looked like a man watching his carefully constructed world begin to crumble around him. Lies, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Tricks and deceptions. You have bewitched the people into believing you helped them. Then call them in, I said. Let them speak for themselves. Let this council hear the truth from the mouths of those who were there. For a long moment, no one moved. Then, one of the elder women, a gray-haired healer named Brita who had always resented my grandmother's skill, cleared her throat. I was in the gathering hall, she said, and her voice trembled slightly. I saw what she did. The child was dying. I have seen enough death to know it when I see it. And then the witch. She stopped, corrected herself. And then Alara laid her hands on the girl, and something happened. Light. Warmth. I cannot explain it. But the child lived. They all lived, the ones she touched. Another elder spoke up, then another. They had not all been present, but they had heard the stories, had seen the recovered patients walking through the village this morning, pale and weak, but alive. The tide was turning, and Aldrich could feel it. This proves nothing, he said, but his voice was desperate now, the voice of a man grasping at threads. She caused the sickness in the first place. She cured what she created to make herself appear a savior. I laughed. I could not help it. The sound rang through the council hall, bright and bitter and utterly without fear. You are a fool, I said. And I watched his face contort with rage. The sickness was caused by a spirit of the deep forest, a creature that lost its way when my grandmother died. It had no one to guide it back, no one to keep the balance, because you drove out the only person who could have helped. I did not curse this village, Elder Aldrich. You did. Your fear and your hatred created the conditions for everything that followed. The room erupted. Elders shouted at each other, at me, at Aldrich. Some demanded my immediate execution. Others called for mercy, for gratitude, for an acknowledgement of what I had done. The two women elders huddled together, whispering furiously. The men pounded the table and pointed fingers. Through it all, Kaelin sat frozen, staring at me with an expression I could not read. I let the chaos continue for a moment. Then I raised my hand, and something pulsed from my grandmother's pendant, a wave of calm that rippled through the room like a stone dropped into still water. The shouting faded. The elders fell silent. Even Aldrich seemed unable to speak, his mouth working soundlessly. I did not come here to beg for your acceptance, I said. I did not come to plead for a place among you. I came because people were suffering, and I had the power to help. That is what I am. That is what my grandmother was before me, and her mother before her. We are the guardians of the balance, the bridge between your world and the wild. You can accept that truth, or you can continue to fight it. But fighting it will only bring you more pain. I turned to leave. I had said what I came to say. The rest was up to them. Wait. The voice was Kaelin's. He had risen from his seat, his face pale, his hands trembling at his sides. His father reached for him, tried to pull him back, but he shook off the grip and stepped around the table. Alara, please. Wait. I stopped, But I did not turn around. I did not trust myself to look at him, to see whatever expression he was wearing. The wound he had inflicted was still too fresh, too raw. I was afraid of what I might feel. "I need to say something," he said. His footsteps echoed in the silent hall as he approached me. "I need you to know." "There is nothing you can say," I told him. "Nothing that will undo what you did." "I know." His voice cracked. "I know I cannot undo it. I know I destroyed something that mattered. But I need you to understand why." I turned then, because I could not help myself. Because some foolish part of me still wanted to understand, still wanted to believe that there had been a reason. That I had not given 5 years of my life to a man who had simply never cared. What I saw in his face was not what I expected. There was shame there, yes, and guilt, and the remnants of the weakness that had always defined him. But there was something else too. Something that looked almost like grief. "My father," he said, and his voice was barely a whisper. "You do not know what he is capable of, what he has done to people who stood against him." I was afraid, Alara. I was afraid of what he would do to me if I defied him. And so I let him use me to destroy you. And I have hated myself every day since. Tears were sliding down his cheeks. I watched them fall, and I felt something shift inside me, some hard knot of anger beginning to loosen. "I loved you," he said. "I still love you. I know you cannot forgive me. I know I do not deserve forgiveness. But I needed you to know that it was real. What we had was real. I was just too much of a coward to fight for it. I stood there for a long moment, looking at this man I had loved, this man who had broken me, this man who was finally telling me the truth. I thought of all the nights I had spent dreaming of this moment, imagining him begging for my forgiveness, imagining the satisfaction I would feel when I refused. But I did not feel satisfaction. I felt tired. I felt sad. I felt the weight of everything we had lost, everything that might have been if he had been braver, if his father had been kinder, if the world had been different. "I believe you," I said finally. "I believe that you loved me. I believe that you were afraid." His eyes lit with desperate hope. "Then you can forgive me," he said. "We can start again. I will stand against my father. I will tell the whole village what he made me do." "No." The word fell between us like a stone. His face crumpled. "You want to know the truth, Kaylin?" I said, and my voice was gentle now, gentle and final. "The truth is that forgiveness is not the same as reconciliation. I can forgive you for being weak. I can understand why you were afraid. But I cannot love you again. I cannot trust you again. You showed me who you are on the night of the solstice, and no amount of tears or apologies can change that." He reached for me, but I stepped back. "I am not the woman you knew," I said. "That woman died in the snow. The woman I am now, the woman I am becoming, she needs someone who will fight for her, someone who will stand beside her, not behind her, someone whose courage matches her own." I paused, feeling the truth of the words as I spoke them. "You are not that person, Kaylin. You never were." He stood there, broken, his arms falling to his sides, his tears still flowing, and I realized, with something like wonder, that I felt no joy in his pain. Only pity, only the sad recognition that we had both been victims of his father's cruelty, and that some wounds were too deep to heal. I turned away from him and walked toward the door. "You cannot leave," Aldrich's voice rang out behind me. "This council has not dismissed you. You are still under judgment." I paused with my hand on the door. "Then judge me," I said without turning around. "But know this. If you condemn me, if you try to harm me, the forest will respond, the wolves will come, the spirits will rise, and whatever protection you think your walls and your weapons provide will prove to be nothing but illusion." I pushed open the door and stepped into the cold morning light. Senna was waiting for me, her white fur bright against the snow, her amber eyes warm with welcome. Behind her, I saw something that made my heart swell. Tomlin. And beside him, a dozen other villagers, people I had healed, people I had helped, people who had watched me work through the night and had finally begun to see the truth. They stood in a loose semicircle, facing the council hall, their faces set with determination. When they saw me emerge, a murmur ran through the group. "We will not let them hurt you," Tomlin said. "Whatever the council decides, we will stand with you." I looked at their faces, these people who had been taught to fear me, who had believed the lies told about my family for generations. They were afraid. I could see it in their eyes. But they were standing anyway. That is what courage is, Senna had told me, being afraid and going anyway. I opened my mouth to thank them, but before I could speak, a sound reached us from the edge of the village. A hunting horn, long and mournful, the signal that every villager knew and dreaded. Wolves on the border, wolves approaching. Not my wolves, not Varric's pack. Something else. The color drained from the faces around me. The villagers who had stood so bravely just moments ago began to back away, their eyes scanning the tree line with sudden terror. "It is beginning," Senna said, her voice urgent in my mind. "The Dark Ones. They have finally come." I did not understand. "What Dark Ones?" I asked. "What is happening?" Senna pressed against my side, her body tense with readiness. "There is more than one pack in these mountains," she said. "Varric's pack keeps the balance. But there are others who reject the old ways, who believe that humans should be driven out or destroyed. They have been waiting for a moment of weakness, a moment when the guardian was absent or untrained. They have found it." The hunting horn sounded again, closer now, and beneath it, I heard something that turned my blood to ice. Howling. Dozens of voices, savage and hungry, rising from the forest like the cry of a storm. "They are coming," Senna said, "and there is nothing between them and this village but us." I looked at the frightened faces around me. I looked at Tomlin, his jaw set with determination despite his fear. I looked at the council hall behind me, where Aldrich and his elders were probably still arguing about whether I was a threat or a savior. It did not matter anymore. None of it mattered. There was only the moment and the choice. "Tell me what to do," I said to Senna. "Tell me how to stop them." Her amber eyes met mine, and in them I saw a fierce, proud love. "You already know," she said. "You have always known. Trust the forest. Trust yourself. Trust the legacy that runs in your blood." I reached for my grandmother's pendant. It was still cool from the power I had expended the night before, but as my fingers closed around it, I felt a spark deep within, a tiny flame, ready to grow. I closed my eyes and reached for the stillness, and somewhere in the forest, the white alpha raised his head and began to run. The dark wolves came with the dawn at their backs, shadows given form and fury. I had never seen creatures like them. Where Varric's pack was white as fresh snow, these wolves were the color of ash and charcoal, their pelts matted with old blood, their eyes burning with a hatred that seemed to have no bottom. They poured from the tree line like a flood, 30 or more, their howls tearing the morning air into ribbons. The villagers scattered. I heard screaming, the crash of doors slamming shut, the desperate cries of parents calling for children. The hunting horn sounded again and again, but there was no one to answer it. The hunters who might have formed a defense were still inside the council hall, still arguing about my fate while death itself descended upon their homes. Senna pressed against my side, her hackles raised, a growl building in her throat. "There are too many," she said. "Even with Varric coming, we cannot hold them all." I looked at the dark wolves streaming toward us, at the terror on the faces of the people around me, at Tomlin standing his ground with nothing but a woodcutter's axe in his trembling hands. I thought of my grandmother, of the stories she had told me, of the legacy I had only begun to understand. I thought of who I had been, and who I was becoming, and who I might yet be. Then I will have to be enough, I said. I stepped forward, away from the villagers, away from the relative safety of the buildings, until I stood alone in the center of the village square. The dark wolves saw me. Their leader, a massive brute with a torn ear and scars that crisscrossed his muzzle like a map of violence, slowed his approach. "Guardian!" he snarled, and his voice in my mind was like the scrape of claws on stone. "You should have stayed hidden in your cave. Now you will die with the rest of these vermin." I did not answer with words. I reached for my pendant, and this time I did not hold back. The power came like a river breaking through a dam. It poured through me, around me, from me, a torrent of light that was every color and no color, that was warmth and strength and the accumulated will of every woman who had ever stood where I stood. I felt my grandmother within it, and her mother, and all the mothers before them, stretching back through generations to the first guardian who had made the pact with the wolves at the dawn of time. I felt the forest itself rising to meet me. The light exploded outward from my chest, a wave that rippled across the village square and into the streets beyond. Where it touched the dark wolves, they recoiled, yelping in pain and confusion. Where it touched the villagers, I heard gasps of wonder, cries of amazement, and where it touched the earth, something began to grow. The snow melted in a perfect circle around me, revealing the frozen ground beneath. And from that ground, impossible in the depths of winter, green shoots pushed upward. Grass, flowers, the first brave growth of a spring that would not arrive for months. Life, answering death. Light, answering darkness. The balance, reasserting itself through the only vessel it had. The dark wolf leader snarled and charged. He was fast, faster than anything I had ever seen. A blur of muscle and fury aimed directly at my throat. I did not move. I did not flinch. I simply raised my hand and let the power flow. The light caught him mid-leap. It wrapped around him like chains, holding him suspended in the air, his jaws snapping at nothing, his legs churning uselessly. I could feel his hatred, his rage, his absolute certainty that humans were a blight that needed to be cleansed from the world. And beneath that, I felt his pain. "You were not always like this," I said, and my voice seemed to come from everywhere at once, from the earth and the sky and the ancient trees that watched from the forest's edge. "You were part of the balance once. What happened to you?" The dark wolf stilled. For a moment, the hatred in his eyes flickered, and I saw something else, something old and wounded and desperately lonely. "The humans killed my mate," he said. "They killed my pups. They hunted us for sport, for pelts, for the pleasure of watching us die. And the guardian, your precious guardian, did nothing. She let it happen. She chose them over us." My grandmother. He was talking about my grandmother. I felt the truth of his words in my bones. I saw, as if through his eyes, the memory of hunters surrounding a den, of arrows flying, of wolves dying while a woman stood at the forest's edge and watched because she had no power left, because the village had broken her, because she had given everything she had to people who despised her, and there was nothing remaining with which to save the ones she should have protected. "She did not choose them," I said. "She was destroyed by them. As you were. As we all were." The dark wolf's struggles slowed. His pack had stopped their advance, confused and uncertain, watching their leader hang helpless in the air. And then, from the forest, Varric came. He burst from the tree line like an avalanche, white fur blazing in the morning light, his pack flowing behind him in a wave of ivory and amber. He did not attack. He simply positioned himself between the dark wolves and the village, his scarred face calm, his ancient eyes meeting mine with something that might have been pride. "Guardian," he said, "the choice is yours." I understood what he meant. I could destroy the dark wolves here and now. The power coursing through me was enough. I could burn away their hatred, their pain, their threat, and the village would be safe forever. But I would also be doing exactly what they expected. Exactly what every human had always done. Choosing my own kind over theirs. Perpetuating the cycle that had created them in the first place. I looked at the dark wolf leader, still suspended in my light, and I made a different choice. I am not my grandmother, I said. I will not stand by while innocents suffer, human or wolf, but I will not destroy you either. The cycle ends here. The old wounds are acknowledged. The balance will be restored. I let the power shift. Instead of chains, it became something else. A bridge, a connection, a pathway between his pain and my compassion, between his hatred and my hope. I showed him what I saw when I looked at the village. Not enemies, but frightened people. Children who laughed and played. Elders who told stories by the fire. Farmers who worked the land and hunters who took only what they needed. People who had been taught to fear the forest, just as he had been taught to hate them. I showed him Tomlin, standing with his axe, ready to die defending people who had once shunned him because his mother was different. I showed him Marta, weeping over her granddaughter's sick bed, willing to accept help from a witch if it meant saving the child she loved. I showed him the small moments of courage and kindness that existed alongside the cruelty and fear. We are all wounded, I said. We have all been broken by those who came before. But we do not have to remain broken. We can choose something else. We can build something new. The dark wolf was silent for a long moment. I felt his mind churning, felt the weight of his grief and his rage pressing against the light I had wrapped around him. And then, slowly, I felt something shift. How? He asked, and his voice was no longer a snarl but something smaller, something almost like a plea. How can there be trust after so much blood? There cannot, I said. Not immediately, not easily. Trust must be built, one moment at a time, one choice at a time. But it must start somewhere. Let it start here. Let it start with us. I released him. He fell to the ground, landing on his feet with the grace of a predator, and for a heartbeat I thought he would attack anyway, would give in to the hatred that had driven him for so long. His pack tensed behind him, ready to follow their leader into battle. But he did not attack. He looked at me, this strange human woman who had held him helpless and then set him free. He looked at Varric, his ancient rival, standing calm and watchful with his pack arrayed behind him. He looked at the village, at the people peering from windows and doorways, their faces pale with terror. And he made his choice. We will withdraw, he said, for now. But this is not finished, Guardian. The wounds are too deep, the mistrust too old. If the humans break faith, if they hunt us again, I will return. And I will not be merciful. Then I will ensure they do not break faith, I said. That is what I am here for. That is what I was born to do. The dark wolf held my gaze for a moment longer. Then he turned and loped back toward the forest, his pack falling in behind him. They disappeared into the trees as silently as they had come, leaving only tracks in the melting snow to mark their passage. I stood there, trembling, as the power slowly receded back into the pendant at my chest. The impossible spring growth around my feet was already fading, the flowers wilting, the grass retreating back into the frozen earth. But something had changed. Something fundamental had shifted. I had faced the darkness, and I had chosen light. Varric approached me, his great form moving with a dignity that seemed almost ceremonial. He stopped before me, and dipped his head in a gesture of respect I had never seen him make to anyone. You have done what no guardian has done in generations, he said. You offered mercy to those who deserved none, and in doing so, you may have begun the healing that we have needed for so long. I was shaking. The aftermath of the power was hitting me now, Exhaustion and exhilaration tangled together until I could barely stand. Senna pressed against my side, supporting me, and I leaned into her warmth gratefully. I did not know if it would work, I admitted. I thought he might kill me anyway. Varek's eyes glinted with something that might have been amusement. He might have, he agreed, but you trusted in something greater than your own safety. You trusted in the possibility of change. That is the heart of what it means to be a guardian. Not power, not strength. Faith that tomorrow can be better than today. I looked around the village square. The villagers were emerging from their hiding places, their faces a mixture of fear and wonder, and something that looked almost like reverence. Tomlin was staring at me as if he had never seen me before. Even the elders, Aldrich among them, had come out of the council hall and stood watching with expressions I could not read. And at the edge of the crowd, I saw Kalen. He was pale, his eyes red-rimmed, his whole body seeming to sag under the weight of what he had witnessed. He looked at me, this woman he had betrayed, this woman he had thrown away like garbage, and I saw in his face the full measure of his regret. He understood now. He understood what he had lost. Not just a lover, not just a healer, but this power, this purpose, this magnificent becoming that he could have been part of if he had been brave enough to stand with me. I felt no satisfaction in his pain, only a distant sadness, a grief for the life we might have had if things had been different. But things were not different. And I had a new life now, a life he had no part in. I turned away from him and walked toward Varek and Senna, toward the forest that called to me with every breath, toward the destiny I had finally accepted as my own. Guardian. The voice stopped me. It was not Kalen. It was Aldrich. I turned to face the elder, this man who had orchestrated my exile, who had poisoned his son against me, who had tried to destroy me simply because I was different. He looked old. Older than he had seemed just hours ago, as if the morning's events had aged him decades in a matter of minutes. There was no hatred in his eyes anymore, only fear, only the dawning realization that he had made a terrible, terrible mistake. "What you did today," he began, and his voice cracked. "What you have always done, healing our sick, protecting our children." Facing that, he gestured vaguely toward the forest. "That threat, for us, after everything we did to you." I waited. I did not help him. Let him find the words himself. "We were wrong," he said finally. "I was wrong. I let my fear blind me to the truth. I let old prejudices and older grudges convince me that you were a threat when you were." He swallowed hard, "when you were the only thing standing between us and destruction." The villagers murmured. This was unprecedented. Elder Aldrich, admitting fault. Elder Aldrich, apologizing to the witch he had banished. I could have accepted his apology. I could have returned to the village, taken up residence in my grandmother's old cottage, resumed my life as the healer who kept her head down and asked for nothing. But I was not that woman anymore. That woman had died in the snow, and the woman who had risen in her place belonged to a different world. "I accept your apology," I said, "but I will not be returning to Thornhallow." Aldrich blinked. "But surely," he began, "after everything, you must see that we need you, that the village cannot survive without a healer, without a guardian to protect us." I smiled, and it was not a cruel smile, only a knowing one. "You have survived for years without a guardian," I said. "You survived by driving out everyone who might have helped you, and then suffering the consequences of your own choices. Perhaps it is time you learned to protect yourselves." I gestured toward the forest, toward the white wolves waiting at the tree line. "I will not abandon you entirely," I said. "The balance must be maintained, and that means ensuring the village is safe. But I will do it from the forest, as my grandmother should have been allowed to do. As every guardian before her did, before your ancestors forgot the old ways and began to see us as threats instead of allies. Tomlin stepped forward, his face troubled. "Will we see you again?" he asked. "Will you come if we need you?" I looked at him. This man who had helped me when no one else would, who had stood with his axe ready to defend me against wolves and councils alike. Of all the people in Thornhallow, he was the one I would miss. "I will come," I said, "when the need is genuine, when the illness is beyond your healer's skill or the threat is beyond your hunter's strength. I will come because that is who I am, and that is the promise my bloodline made long before I was born." I paused, considering my next words carefully. "But you must also come to me," I continued. "Not just in crisis, in peace, in the quiet times when there is no emergency, no plague, no dark wolves at the gates. Come to the forest's edge and call for me, and I will answer. Learn to see the wild not as an enemy, but as a neighbor. Teach your children to respect what they do not understand instead of fearing it. That is how we heal what has been broken. That is how we build the trust that has been missing for so long." I did not wait for a response. I turned and walked toward the wolves, toward Senna, who was watching me with pride, toward Varric, who dipped his head again in acknowledgement. Behind me, I heard Kaelin's voice, broken and desperate. "Alara, please, give me another chance. I will prove myself. I will earn your forgiveness." I did not stop. I did not turn. Some chances, once lost, can never be reclaimed. Some betrayals cut too deep for any apology to heal. I had forgiven him because forgiveness was necessary for my own peace. But forgiveness did not mean return. It did not mean trust. It did not mean love. It only meant that I had set down the burden of his choices so that I could carry the weight of my own. We walked into the forest, the white alpha on one side of me and my wolf sister on the other, and the trees closed behind us like a door. The weeks that followed were strange and beautiful. I settled into the guardian's life as if I had been born to it, which I suppose in a way I had. I learned the forest's deepest secrets, the hidden groves and sacred springs, the places where the old spirits still lingered and the boundaries between worlds grew thin. I ran with the wolves under winter moons and spring stars, feeling my human limitations fall away piece by piece. I discovered that being a guardian did not mean isolation. Tomlin came to the forest's edge often, bringing news from the village and questions about herbs and remedies. Others followed, hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence. The children were the bravest, as children often are, leaving small offerings of bread and flowers at the boundary stones and shrieking with delight when Senna appeared to accept them. The village began to change. Not quickly, not dramatically, but in the slow, steady way that a river shapes a canyon over countless years. They stopped speaking of witches and started speaking of the guardian. They stopped seeing the forest as an enemy and started seeing it as, if not a friend, then at least a neighbor worthy of respect. And I changed too. I grew into my power as the seasons turned, as winter gave way to spring and spring to summer. The pendant at my chest became not a burden but a birthright, its light answering my call with increasing ease. I learned to hear the forest's voice in every rustle of leaves, every bird's song, every whisper of wind through ancient branches. I learned to speak with the spirits, to guide the lost ones home, to maintain the balance that my grandmother had fought so hard to protect. I learned to be alone without being lonely, to be different without being diminished, to be powerful without being cruel. Sometimes, in the quiet hours, I thought of Kaelin, not with anger anymore, not even with sadness, only with the distant puzzlement of someone looking back at a version of themselves they can barely recognize. Had I really loved him so desperately? Had I really believed he was my future? I had been so young then, so hungry for belonging. I had mistaken his attention for love and his secrecy for passion, never seeing that what he truly offered was only the fragments he could spare without risking anything that mattered. Now I understood that love should not require hiding, that true partnership meant standing together in the light, not stealing moments in shadows, that I deserved someone who would fight for me, not someone who would sacrifice me at the first sign of danger. I had not found that someone yet. Perhaps I never would. But I had found something equally precious. I had found myself. On the first anniversary of my exile, I climbed to the ridge above the cave and looked out over the valley as the sun set in a blaze of gold and crimson. Thornhallow was a scattering of warm lights in the gathering dusk, smoke rising from chimneys, the sounds of evening life drifting up to me on the wind. They were singing. Some festival, some celebration I had once been part of and would never be part of again. But I felt no grief at my exclusion. Only peace. Only the quiet satisfaction of knowing that they were safe, that they were thriving, that the balance I protected was holding firm. Senna found me there, as she always did. "You are thinking deep thoughts," she said, settling beside me. "I am thinking that a year ago, I believed my life was over," I said. "I believed that Kalen's betrayal had destroyed everything I was and everything I could be. I thought I would die in the snow, alone and unmourned." "And now?" Senna asked. I smiled. "Now I understand that what felt like destruction was actually transformation. That the woman I was had to die so that the woman I am could be born. That sometimes the worst thing that can happen to us is also the best thing, if we have the courage to let it change us." Senna pressed her warm body against my side. "You have become wise, sister," she said. "Wiser than many who have walked this path before you." "I have had good teachers," I said, "and good companions. I would not have survived without you and Varric, without the forest itself, holding me together when I wanted to fall apart." We sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. The wolves were singing in the distance, their voices rising in the ancient harmonies that had echoed through these mountains since the world was young. I am home, I thought. For the first time in my life, I am truly home. The woman I had been, the healer who had begged for scraps of love and acceptance, she was gone forever. In her place stood someone new, someone stronger, someone who had walked through fire and emerged not burned, but forged. I was Ilara, daughter of the forest, heir to the guardian legacy, keeper of the balance between worlds. I was wolf sister and spirit speaker, healer of the sick and protector of the wild. I was everything my grandmother had hoped I would become, and things she had never imagined. I was the alpha queen of my own fate, and I regretted nothing. Far below, in the village that had cast me out, a man stood at his window and watched the forest. He did not know I could see him, did not know I could feel the weight of his sorrow even from this distance. He was thinking of me, as he did every night. He was drowning in the knowledge of what he had thrown away. But that was his burden to carry, not mine. I rose and walked back toward the cave where Varric waited, where the fire crackled warm and welcoming, where my true family gathered to share stories and laughter and the simple joy of belonging. Behind me, the last light of sunset painted the sky in shades of violet and rose. Before me, the forest opened its arms, and I walked forward into the life I had always been meant to live.